you have got to be able to ask questions. And they don't even have to be intelligent. They don't even have to be perfectly phrased and perfectly crafted, right? And it's something that you sat down and thought about for hours upon hours. How am I going to ask this? You just go and ask people questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the B-Xcellent podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Harrison Smith. And today I have an amazing guest. This is Dr. Brandon Pitts. He works at the School of Industrial Engineering. And you are one of Purdue's bright and shining stars, as I've been told today. I won't tell you who, but quite frankly, you've won some impressive awards, and I'm just going to read a couple. So you have the National U.S. Department of Transportation Inclusive Design Challenge. That was one. Can you speak a little bit about that real quick?
Oh, yeah. So in 2020, the U.S. DOT, which we call Department of Transportation, they launched an inclusive design challenge where they were looking for people to submit design solutions or design concepts of an autonomous vehicle that could work for older adults and people with disabilities. And so we actually assembled a team of researchers, students, industry partners, and some people in government to actually pull off building a life-size autonomous vehicle concept that's actually about an hour away from here in Carmel, Indiana.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. All right. And not to make light of that, the next award that I'm about to name, so you have the National Science Foundation Career Award. It's the highest award that they give early career faculty members. So one, congratulations on those awards. And two, how does it feel?
So believe it or not, an NSF Career Award is something that a lot of assistant professors only dream of. When you first start your faculty career, there's a lot of pressure on getting that award because I think the funding rate is like 20%, maybe even less than that. So you can think of 1 in every 5 assistant professors is getting something like that. And it's one of those grants that you actually have about 3 chances to get. So you can apply for it 3 separate times consecutively, however you want to do it. But you've got to do it before you are promoted to associate professor. So a lot of us end up spending our summers writing that grant, thinking about what we want our future careers to look like, because it is a grant, in fact, that is intended to launch a person into their academic career. So you've got to talk about what you see your research program to look, what you envision it to look like in 10, 20 years from now, and how the things that you outline in that grant will actually materialize and put you on this launch pad to whatever you envision that to be. So it's a very fun project to, number one, write, but we just got it funded. So I'm just as excited about getting started with it.
Absolutely. I imagine that comes with its own challenges. Like It probably pushed you to new lengths, right?
Absolutely. To really think about all of the research I have been working on since I got to Purdue in 2017. There are a lot of different interests that I have, a lot of students that I have working with me that are working on a variety of projects. And so in that grant, I had to actually convince the reviewers how all of those things fit together. So it really pushed me to think creatively about connecting all of the different projects that I've got going on. So again, lots of fun. It's a good academic exercise. And it's something that even if somebody isn't applying for it, I encourage them to really think about doing.
So before we kind of get into the rest of the podcast, I'd like, people to get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
So you are from Louisiana.
Yes, Baton Rouge to be exact.
Baton Rouge, right. So I've been to New Orleans a few times, or no, one time, and it was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
I really love that area. But I'm guessing you growing up there, you have a more personal experience there. What are like some of your favorite things about that area? Favorite place to eat, or what would you recommend?
Yeah. So since you're asking me about restaurants, I love to eat. They maybe can't see it because I'm sitting down, but I absolutely love to eat. And one of the restaurants that immediately come to mind is a seafood restaurant that we've got called Parran's, Parrian''.
Okay.
And it is literally a staple for Louisiana. It's a locally owned business. They've been in business more than 40 years, I believe, but it is kind of an all inclusive or exclusive, however you want to look at it, seafood restaurant.
Okay.
So you can go and get a lot of the staples, types of food, a lot of the specialty foods that one would associate with Louisiana, like your catfish, your shrimp, your oysters, your boudin balls, for example, hush puppies, all of those kinds of things, right? And so every time I go home, that's a place that I'm definitely visiting, but I'm also encouraging people who are in the area to go and visit it.
Oh no, that's awesome. So what's your favorite dish or meal or thing to get there?
It's called like the catfish achafalaya, which is pieces of fried catfish that have crawfish etouffee over them.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow, that was worth the getting through. So that's awesome. I never had that before. The next thing I'd ask you, okay, so from there you went to Louisiana State.
I did. Yep.
Yeah. And that's where you did industrial engineering.
That's right.
All right. And before we get there, I guess what got you into engineering in the first place? Like what's inspired you to want to go to Louisiana State and then select industrial engineering? I feel like that's not something that at least most people I'm familiar with know about to kind of go into. So what kind of got you?
Yeah. And to tell you the truth, I actually didn't know about it in high school either. So I grew up in Baton Rouge. Louisiana State University, which most people know as LSU, is actually located in Baton Rouge. So it was maybe 14 minutes down the street from where I grew up.
Yeah.
And I did stay on campus. I got to let people know that. And I had a great time, and I certainly recommend it to any college student who is looking for a full college experience to stay on campus, because it's completely different. I can talk about how I stayed on campus, and my sister who grew up with me did not. And there was a difference in just our college experiences in general. But what kind of got me interested in STEM and industrial engineering and LSU? So growing up, if you knew me, I was somebody who loved airplanes and airports. I absolutely loved just sitting at the airport and could do it for hours upon hours and not have any problem with that. And to tell you the truth, where I'm at in my life now, I can still do that. Sit at airports for hours upon hours and just watch planes kind of take off,
right?
And land all day long. And so my childhood dream was to be a pilot. That did not work out for a number of reasons. There is an organization in Baton Rouge known as the Civil Air Patrol, which is an organization that actually mentors kids under the age of 13, and it actually shows them the ropes of flying. And I'm not kidding. The day that I called to inquire about signing up for that program, I had just become ineligible due to my age. Okay, so that was one thing that kind of took me out, but I still had this passion for aviation. And so when it got time for me to graduate high school, I was thinking about how can I make this aviation dream work. I thought it was, I thought a pilot was what I wanted to be, but at some point I realized it was doing anything in the aviation industry. And so when I looked at the majors that LSU had, industrial engineering was one that people had actually studied in and then gone to work for certain airlines, worked at the airports. I got to interview some of those, people who were in those careers to see what were some of their thought processes. And so they told me that they also saw a future in aviation through industrial engineering, because it's an engineering discipline that is focused on systems and processes and people and moving of materials and those kinds of things. And that's exactly what the airline industry is about.
Wow. That's a great way to connect those things together. So next from there, you decided to get your master's and PhD from University of Michigan.
Yes. Go Blue.
You go Blue. And you also explore industrial and operations engineering. Now, my question to you is, did you know that you were always going to get a master's and PhD, or was that like something that just happened?
Yeah. So while I was at LSU, I had the opportunity to do an internship in one summer, which was working with, we now call it United Airlines, but back then it was Continental Airlines. So I'm dating myself a little bit. So I literally had an internship with Continental Airlines. At the time, their headquarters were located in Houston, which was 4 hours from Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
Now they've relocated to Chicago, and they've rebranded themselves as Fully United. So United and Continental merged, I think, in 2009 or 2010. So I had the opportunity to do the internship there one summer. And then I also had an opportunity in the summer before that to do research at the University of Iowa as an undergraduate student. And it was a program known as AGAP, the Alliance for Graduate Education and the Professoriate, AGAP, AGEP. And at the time, I signed up to work with a professor who was doing research in human factors in aviation.
Wow.
And so I had one summer where I could do an internship with the airline industry, another summer where I could do research in aviation. But unfortunately, that didn't pan out because if you look back in 2008, the history of what was going on there, the Iowa City River flooded, and that actually caused airport operations to shut down. So long story made short, instead of working with the professor who was working in aviation, I ended up working with a professor who was doing human factors research in driving. And he was doing driver distraction work and doing these large scale studies where he'd bring people in, and he designed different driving scenarios, and he would ask people to pretend as if they were driving on the highway, and he was collecting massive amounts of data about them. And that was a world that I had not really thought about, right? My parents had cars. I was driving at the time, right? Because I was past high school.
Yeah.
But I never really thought about all of the science and engineering that went into the design of a car, and that there were people right here in the US that were actually collecting data that would help shape the design of vehicles. So to answer the question, when it was time for me to graduate undergrad, I looked at those two experiences, the undergraduate research experience dealing with human factors in driving and the internship I had in aviation, and I actually merged the two. I felt in undergrad that once I graduated, I wasn't ready to go work. There was something in me that still felt like there was more to learn. And so I said, hey, let's give this grad thing a try. So I had family who lived in Detroit, and Detroit is only like 45 minutes from Ann Arbor. And I said, hey, if I'm going to go that far away from home, I better go somewhere where I've got family, for holidays like Thanksgiving,
Sure,
Easter,
absolutely.
4th of July. If I wasn't flying back to Louisiana, I had a chance to go and visit with them. So that worked out well. That's how I landed on Michigan. And I found out at the time that Michigan was actually number 2 in the country for industrial engineering. And so there was a professor there, Nadine Sarter, Dr. Nadine Sarter, who ended up being my advisor, who was doing exactly that. She was a pilot, and she was doing aviation human factors research, but she had also done driving research. And I said, wow, here I am, this boy from, Southern boy from Louisiana who thought about being a pilot, and it looks like he may still have the opportunity to do that. And what I can tell you is that she really gave me the knowledge that I needed about aviation. I mean, she helped us understand how airplanes were designed, how cockpits were designed, the psychology of pilots, the psychology of Boeing, right? And engineers at Boeing, and the things that they need to think about to build airplanes that humans are going to be flying. So long answer, but that's kind of how it came to that. I knew I was interested in aviation, took up industrial engineering in undergrad, did an internship in an REU summer program, felt that when I graduated undergrad, I still wanted to do some more learning, found someone at Michigan who was doing exactly what I thought I wanted to do, and it's been history since.
No, while it's a long answer, I feel like it's an amazing answer because your experiences kind of shaped and folded certain paths or certain things that were going to happen for you.
Yeah.
And without those experiences and your internship and your, just passion for airplanes, without any of those experiences, it seems like you're not here where you are today.
Absolutely.
So I think that's, an understatement. Sometimes people feel like they have to know everything all from the jump. It's more that you need to put yourself in positions to gain more experiences, more data, so to speak,
Yeah.
to make better informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's
Absolutely.
probably hits home to what you're doing, helping people inform better decisions,
Yeah.
right? With this human factors thing that you're
Absolutely.
talking about. So you have a lot of success, and I know you probably are like, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but you, to someone who's coming behind you,
Mm-hmm.
looking to be just as successful, you've definitely put yourself in a great position to reach maybe all the dreams that you have
Mm-hmm.
set for yourself. What do you think is the secret sauce that,
Mm.
like, you know, got you to this point?
Yeah.
Is it a family member? Is it like you have a role model of yours,
Yeah.
or is it just like, you put this idea in your mind and you're like, I'm going to obtain this.
Yeah. It's probably a combination of both.
Okay.
But the one I think I can speak of, that's right off the top of my head, is goes back to something that I mentioned in the previous question. Is I found that I was passionate about something, and s- I figured out early on what that was,
Mm,
and everything that I have done since has literally spun from that.
okay.
Every decision I've made professionally has had to somehow tie to this passion I've got for aviation, STEM, human factors, driving, what have you. Every decision I've made professionally has had to somehow tie back to one of those. And I've had to ask myself, how is doing this going to make sure that I'm still able to,
Mm,
fulfill these passions that I've got? Because that's the one that's really what keeps me up and
okay.
keeps me going. And the other thing is the curiosity. And
Mm,
I don't know if that's innate or if there have been life experiences that's caused me to be curious, but half of it is the passion that I said, okay, I want to be doing something in aviation. And then the other half is as I walk through life, as things happen, events unfold, I'm always curious about how, who, what, when, where, how, and why, right?
mm,
That's what we're taught in middle school.
yes.
And I didn't realize that as I got older, I was operationalizing that, right? I was living in that. And I mean, I, every single day, probably I'm asking those 5 questions, even if I'm not thinking about it.
Mm,
And so I think that's it. It's really curiosity, which most of us have, even if we don't want to admit it. You can sit down right now and think about things that you are just curious about that you may not want to share with people because people may think I'm crazy that I'm asking this, right?
fair enough.
So it's the curiosity, and then it's the passion and the vision, and being able to in your mind see where it is you want to be. Doesn't matter if you actually get there. That's the secret.
Right.
You've got to be able to really envision what you would like your life to look like. So guess what? For me, it was somehow I thought I'd be sitting at a desk in an office at an airport where I had a big glass, a big glass in the front of me.
Sure.
That was my vision.
Mm,
That I would literally be sitting at in an office at a desk at an airport where I had these huge pieces of glass in front of me, and I could see airplanes and taking off and landing all day long.
mm,
And I'm so serious. Since I was 5 years old, that was the vision I had. And I can say that I've had to modify that a little bit just based on how life has worked out. But 2 out of 3 of those things is still very true right now, right? I'm in an office. I've got glass in the office, right?
yes, I see
May
it.
not be at an airport, but 2 of those 3 things is true. And I'm still working on projects that affect how airplanes are being built today. I'm still working on projects that pilots have to actually, which we have an aviation program here on campus. Pilots actually come to our lab and do experiments where we're trying to test out some new device, right? And we're learning about their psychology so that we can go back and tell your Boeings or your Airbus, hey, this is a feature you might want to think about. So I'm still doing, like I say, 2 out of 3 of those things.
Mm. No, I think that's amazing. You hinted on like something that's, I think, very unique there, is that even though you wanted to be a pilot,
Mm-hmm.
you still found a way to be a pilot in some
Absolutely.
way or form. And I think sometimes we can get over fixated on seeing our vision one particular way, but there's different ways to still obtain your dream. And just because one door closed doesn't mean all is lost.
Yeah.
All right. So I think your story is definitely a great example of that. So what are some recommended like what strategies did you employ when you were in undergrad or grad school that you think helped you become successful? Were you a person that like early riser, you went for a run in the morning,
Mhm.
then you studied? Were you like, do you know of any like special, like unique or quirky things that you may have done to like help you get through? Because
Yeah.
while you're saying all this stuff, like all this stuff is probably in a perspective of looking back,
Mhm.
and you had to do that when you had to write your career award,
Mhm.
or you wrote about what you've done so far, where you come from, and how that all ties together. And you had to see these like really nice positives, but there had to been some spots where it was more difficult or challenging,
Yeah.
and you had to employ something, whether it was faith, whether it was
Yeah.
um, determination,
Yeah.
or maybe, to your point, passion got you through.
Yeah.
Like you just loved your work so much that like it made it so easy for you to never like fall off the track.
Yeah.
So what things
Yeah.
do you recommend like people like keep doing this and
Yeah.
it'll help you?
So one of the things I would say is I talked about how I was curious about things in
Sure.
life. And even with my students that I teach now, which tend to be either seniors who are getting ready to graduate from undergrad or master students, PhD students, I try to encourage students and anybody for that much to ask questions.
Mm,
Um, and you may say, what do you mean? I've already said that we've got curiosities that are running wild in a lot of cases.
mm,
So I really encourage people to step out of their comfort zone. And when they feel that they're having a difficult time or they can't quite figure it out for themselves, or they want to be in a position or somewhere in the future that
mhm,
they can't quite grasp how to do that, you have got to be able to ask questions. And they don't even have to be intelligent.
mm,
They don't even have to be perfectly phrased and perfectly crafted, right? And it's something that you sat down and thought about for hours upon hours. How am I going to ask this? You just go and ask people questions. If you see a CEO, you you walk into a CEO, sorry, you see a CEO at the grocery store, you know that that person is the case. And by the way, you can definitely figure out who CEOs are. When I was working at Continental Airlines years ago, the face of the CEO at the time was plastered everywhere, and he would just be walking around Houston,
mm,
and he was very personable. And he was somebody you could go to and just ask, "Hey, how did you do this? What were your steps? What's your line of thinking about this? Right? How did you make this business decision?
right.
Some of which he can share, some of which he cannot." So I think my first piece of advice for people is to to be comfortable asking questions when they feel that they're stuck. And that could even include asking for help. There have been many times where I've had to rely on mentors because I felt stuck somehow and I just couldn't get it figured out. And I had to go to somebody who was either older than me, wiser than me, who had been in, who is in a place where I'm trying to get to. And I just had to sit down and say, hey, how do I work this out? And you'd be surprised, more than 50% of people, significantly more than 50% of people, would actually sit down with you and give you the answers that you're seeking. I think there's something innate about all of us that's wanting to kind of reach back and make sure that we're helping, pull people up.
Absolutely.
I think that's the biggest piece. It's been people, and so I think I've wrapped up a lot of different pieces in there, but it's been the curiosity that's led me to ask questions to be able to get the things that I want to get done.
Absolutely. And not being afraid to ask questions. I
Yeah.
think that's why we're pushing asking questions. I'll push back a little bit. Like you gotta think about your questions
Yeah,
sometimes.
okay, sure.
Cause like you ever been in class, you ever said something to us like to the whole class, and then someone like 10 minutes later asks you a question about something that you
Yeah,
already spoke on, and you're like, you weren't
yeah,
listening.
yeah. Okay, that's very fair. Okay, I totally
but
agree.
to most students, there's a lot more. I think there was a lot more students out there that are afraid to ask anything than there
Yeah,
are students that are just asking questions just to ask questions. So
absolutely.
therefore, I'm in total agreement with you.
Yeah,
Ask questions and be curious,
be curious. Right.
and to be honest, this education and your knowledge that you're obtaining, it's not about them, it's about you.
Absolutely.
So if they gotta get frustrated, be upset that they gotta answer this question to you, then at least you are one question more knowledgeable
Yeah.
than you were a minute ago.
Yeah.
So this is about you. And if you're going to go to school, this is your education as much as anything. So I need to know, I need to
Yeah.
know these things.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you never know how that information may prove useful to you in the
Yeah.
future. I think that was amazing. All right, so we're gonna move on to the excellent takes. One, because I don't want to keep you here all day, but already I'm thinking we definitely got to make sure we have you back. But the next thing I want to say is, um, I'm not sure if you've ever been in this position, but I know a lot of students who have a hard time knowing when they chosen a major
Mm.
or they chosen a pathway for themselves, and life might be shaping up in a way that says, maybe I need to transition,
Yeah.
maybe I need to do this. And to some students, it's a hard thing to do because it's like, am I giving up because this is challenging? Am I giving up because, whatever? Or should I really be taking this choice, taking this chance and opportunity to pivot myself into this different pathway that I think might be better for myself? Like when should a student particularly like make that choice, or how?
Yeah.
Like, is there a point where there's too late? Like we're already down this pathway, or is there a time where I think you get what I'm going here for.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. And I've actually got personal experience with that.
Okay.
So I just made my story sound nice, right? I
You're right.
talked about how I was, in love with aviation, and even 20 years later, I'm still doing something in aviation. But there was a moment in time where I got distracted, and this was coming out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
I did really well in chemistry class.
Mm.
So, I loved chemistry almost as much as I did aviation.
Okay.
I got to be honest. And chemistry was one of those classes where people who had taken it before me had said, "Oh, you need to be afraid of this because it's a difficult class." And the person that the professor or the teacher at the time that you're going to be taking this with is notorious for being difficult.
Mm.
So there was some initial fear that was in me already. But once I got to the class, I remember thinking to myself, "What are people talking about? This is great." I mean, it just made so much sense, and I loved it. So what happened was, I'll modify my story from earlier. When I got ready to graduate high school, I actually struggled with, do I go the aviation route or do I go the chemistry route? Because I so loved chemistry and math.
Mm.
And so when I first enrolled at LSU, I actually started off as a chemical engineer.
Mm.
And some of that was me maybe subconsciously suppressing this aviation thing. I said, you know what, that may not pan out. Let me do something that's a little bit more practical. Right. This was the mind where my heart was telling me, you better take up aviation. So and in Louisiana, we are on the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
So there is nothing but oil refineries, chemical plants.
Okay.
And in fact, I would say that chemical engineering is the largest major at LSU for that very reason.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of people who are born and raised in Louisiana, and the next step for them is to stay in Louisiana and work at one of these oil refineries or chemical plants. And that was what this Brandon Pitts, for a second, thought his future was to be.
Mm.
So I stayed in chemical engineering for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of courses that overlap with industrial engineering. But by the time I got to the end of the first year, I remember feeling something in my gut that said, this isn't it.
Mm.
I was doing well in the classes, still loved math and chemistry. But as I started to learn more about chemical engineering, what the future was, the senior level classes that I needed to take, they were talking about chemicals, running through pipes and measuring the pressure differentials on moving from small pipes to large pipes.
Sure.
To myself, I said that doesn't get me excited. That is not what I envisioned when I was leaving high school. So I went and this is the how to do it. I went and met with a guidance counselor at the time at LSU, and we had an intervention, if I can say.
Okay.
where the resolution was industrial engineering. When I laid everything out on the table for that guidance counselor, her response to me was industrial engineering. And so sophomore year, first day, switched my major, and I haven't looked back. So to answer the question, I don't think you can ever be too late making the decision. But the second that your heart tells you that that is not your passion, I think that's the time for you to
Yes.
make the change.
I think something that stands out in your story is laying things out on the table.
Absolutely.
All right. So it's not just that your heart just randomly picked industrial. It's kind of like when you put all the information out there, reminds me of doing like a physics problem.
Yeah.
And you put all the information out there, it kind of can tell you how to answer this question.
Yeah.
Right. And you were maybe even looking at a piece of the question or a piece of the problem. And so, like, if you look at a piece of the problem, it will tell you to do something else.
Absolutely.
But when you put all the information out on the table, it's almost like it became clear.
Yeah.
And now, like, it aligns with your heart as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what I would speak to people, because there are some people out here like, oh, I'm just going to follow my heart.
Yeah.
And following your heart is good. But I think it's also got to make sense.
It's got to make sense. And I don't want to underestimate other people's power in helping you think through that, right? And don't dismiss that, right? I said that I took it up on myself to go and meet with a guidance counselor because I knew that I was wrestling with something that maybe family couldn't help me with, that maybe friends couldn't help me with, right? Friends who seemingly had it together, who just knew when they got to LSU, this is the major I'm taking up.
Fair.
They weren't the ones at that time, that could actually help me resolve this. I had to go to a professional, and she did it.
Right.
She did it. And so I just want to encourage anybody who's listening that feels like, yeah, my heart is not in this. It's not too late. You just need to be strategic about how to make the change. It's never too late.
Absolutely. No, I think that's amazing. The next question and the last question of this piece is, what can students do to make themselves stand out amongst their peers? All right. So I imagine what some students have learned is we're not really competing by grades. We're learning the same information. We're going to the same school.
Yeah.
But how do I make myself stand out? How do I make myself a great candidate for a particular position? I imagine that you had to look at behind that up for yourself. At some point, you were going to apply to Purdue University or apply to these different jobs, and you were looking to stand out.
Yeah.
So what do you think helped you stand out? Maybe you think it's just your grades. Maybe it's your internships. Maybe it's the way you think about life or think about your career.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think made you stand out as an amazing candidate?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to something that I've already said. And there's two pieces here. Number one, it's the passion.
Okay.
And by that, what I mean is, sure, if you're qualified for the job, chances are other people are.
Right.
But if you can demonstrate and non-verbally articulate that passion, right? When you talk about things, you should light up.
Yes.
Right? People should be able to feel that energy, right? And so that's number one is to really, again, figure out what your passion is and communicate that in the interview or whatever it is you're seeking, because people will pick up on it. And the second thing is, well, three things. The second thing I would say is you got to be opportunistic and also visionary enough to see where are the places that you need to be that will help you connect with the people that you need to connect with. Okay, that's a mouthful. But what I'm saying is, if I want to come to Purdue and I know that it's incredibly competitive to get here, but I know that there are that they're holding like a college fair, and there are going to be professors and administrators there that can not only give me advice, but could actually see me in person and get a sense of who I am beyond my application, then I want to be thinking about, hey, I probably need to be in that place, right? I think COVID changed some things for us, and we think that, yeah, I'll just send an email or I'll just do a quick Zoom call, but I don't want people to underestimate um, the power of being at the right place or in the right place at the right time.
Okay.
So that's number two. And the third thing is something I've already said is figuring out what questions to ask. Because asking questions doesn't just help you get answers that you need, but it shows to other people that you're curious, that you got a certain level of intellect, and that if they put you in this position, you're not going to be somebody who might just do exactly what you're told, right? You're going to actually think a little bit about if it makes sense and what may benefit the organization or globally.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So for me, there's an art to asking a question.
Yeah.
And depending on the type of question you're asking, and I think if it comes with that passion and curiosity factor,
Mm-hmm.
you'll wind up asking some really good questions that make people have an understanding about who you are.
Yeah.
You don't have to just show them your CV. Your question alone
Yeah.
has given me insight in who you are as a person, because not everybody is going to come up with that type of question.
Yes.
Like your style of question just showed me what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
It showed me how you think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so like, that's just from asking a question.
Yeah.
That's not even you just spitting like, oh, I know this, I know that, I know this. You know, that your question says a lot about who you are. So
Absolutely.
it's an art.
Yeah.
And if you're naturally curious, naturally passionate, and you ask questions, you'll start to ask even better questions.
Yeah. And
You know?
people will recognize that, and that is what will make you stand out.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really great. And then also putting yourself an opportunity to be seen um in different opportunities, such as different events,
Yeah.
like going to conferences,
Yep.
showing up, getting dressed, putting clothes on, and just really putting yourself in spaces
Yeah.
in which you can be seen by other people. Because
Absolutely.
sometimes standing out is like being seen, you know,
Yeah.
and it's hard to be seen in an email. It's hard to be seen in a Zoom conference. Like you get Zoom fatigue, and I've met somebody on Zoom and then they met me in person. Two different reactions. Not that Zoom wasn't a good reaction,
Yeah.
but being in person was an even better experience
Yeah.
of me. And they were like, wow. And I started taking it as a dig, but it's like, you're way better than I thought you were going to be. And I'm like, I wonder what your thought was before, but I don't think it was a poor thing. I think it was just them saying like, there's so much more to you that I can
Yeah.
take in person and seeing you now.
Absolutely.
I have a more personable experience that I can take with me.
Yeah.
So now when I hear your name and you send an email, hey, we met at this event and me and you had this conversation about this,
Yeah.
it jogs my memory.
Absolutely.
But if you're saying, I sent you this email a couple weeks ago, like you don't have a face, you don't have a personal memory to me.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to remember you. It's not personal. It's just, it's a little difficult.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really great points that you brought up. So we get to the close to the last section, and I know I got to get you out of here. Do you have any questions for me? I know I've sit here and just bombarded you with questions. I put you in the hot seat.
Yeah.
Do you even have questions for me?
Yeah. So I think the first question is,
oh man, first. Go ahead.
The first question is, since we've been talking about vision and those things, what is your vision for the podcast? That's number one. And then I think the second thing is, for the people that are watching it, what is it that you want them to take from it? And I'm asking that because I think it's intended for a broader audience.
Yes.
Right? Some of the way I've answered the questions have been targeted to undergrads, for example, right? But you, in your mind, you probably are thinking that multiple different groups of people can benefit. So kind of what's your vision for the podcast? And then what is it that you really want people to take from this?
All right, so I'll answer it in reverse. So what they can take from it, one, there's a lot of things to take from this. Every single podcast that I've done so far, I think there's unexpected gems in each one of them. And whether you're going into academia or not, I think all of this information is useful no matter where you are. I'd imagine if you're just going into industry, I'd imagine if you're just going into different aspects of your life, you could use all of this information.
Mhm.
Asking questions, I think, is important no matter where you are in
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Staying curious, staying passionate,
Yeah.
all very important any stage of your life.
Yeah.
You don't need to necessarily be going into academia. But I think what you could also take is one, seeing and hearing people who maybe look like you, who are successful in their own right.
Mhm.
And these things are possible. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of people in engineering, if at all.
Mhm.
And so my inspiration or my thought process that I could actually obtain or reach a certain level or work at a Purdue University
Yeah.
is very limited in my mind. So therefore, this gives hope.
Mhm.
This gives insight on what it took that person to be successful. It also just provides little gold nuggets of information that might help me weather the storm,
Yeah.
which is undergrad, graduate school, academia, becoming a
Industry.
paraphrase, industry, all of it. So I just want to provide a library space of information that is that people can access at any points in time.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever been to seminars and you heard someone say something really good and insightful, and you're like, oh, that was great. And it feeds you for a moment
Yeah.
and then it's gone.
Yeah.
This podcast gets to live in a library of knowledge and information forever.
Wow.
And those people watching this podcast, whenever they feel low, whenever feel like they can't make it, or whenever they need a little bit of an advice, they can use this as something they can come back to and replay as much as they
Wow.
want to and whenever they want to.
Yeah.
Okay. So where I see this, I see this as a database of information and knowledge,
Mhm.
a database that provides many different things. This podcast, I think, for me,
Mhm.
maybe this is me and my ego, but I think this is a very special podcast, and it can provide multiple different things.
Yeah.
So I see it growing into a library of sorts. I see me maybe interviewing people multiple times. So
Mhm.
you just, you're coming
Oh,
back
man.
here.
Oh, man.
And I see this as, I also see, so at first I was just, and this is great that you asked this question because eventually I was going to make another podcast to
Mhm.
say this, but it would have been short.
Yeah.
But I see myself interviewing, not just Black people, but also, other underrepresented groups as well,
Mhm.
because I feel like we face all the same challenges, and if we can share all that knowledge with each other, we'll
Mhm.
be in a better place. There's so many things that are against us, but there's so many people who, there's some bright stars in our groups, and they have knowledge and information that would make our process a lot easier for us. And if we could pass that knowledge to the next person and it can help them be successful,
Wow.
I think we've done a great
That's
job.
powerful.
So, um, hopefully that answers to some degree your question
Absolutely.
of where I think this thing could go. And as long as I'm breathing, I plan to take this podcast as far as it can go. And I'm starting here at Purdue University as far as interviewing people, but then the next step from that is to get more people. I'm sure there's more people all across the United States. We're just spread so thin. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So like, there may not be a lot of us here at Purdue, but if we could take them all and push them in one
Yeah.
location,
Yeah.
you'll wind up seeing like a sea of us. It's actually a lot of us doing some really great research, really great things, really great stories as well. Like your story was amazing today. And, for me, what I learned is to stay curious, stay passionate, and stay asking questions,
There you go. Yeah.
and don't be afraid to ask a question, at different levels. I'll tell you, be honest, you know, I'm a curious person myself,
Mhm.
but sometimes I'm like, that might sound like a dumb question. But what I've learned, what helped me over time is that I'll ask a question and the teacher would validate me a little bit. They was like, that's a good question,
Yeah.
because like I would ponder over a lot of different things. And sometimes as a kid, you weren't you weren't
Yeah.
allowed to say too much,
Mm.
but, stay curious,
Yeah.
stay asking questions. And the more questions you ask, Like, and also like feel the question you're asking. Don't ask a question just to ask a question. All right. Ask a question that you care about, and that when you get the answer to it, it's going to do something for you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So, that's where I tend to go with the podcast. Those are the things I tend to do. And I imagine this actually blooms into something even more. Like, I will also say, even past the podcast, I think more of this needs to be done. Creating databases of knowledge. The other thing is this: I started this podcast, yes, because I saw a need, but I also saw a problem. There's not enough of us. I imagine if you had to always stop and mentor and give all this advice to people on the regular, you wouldn't have been able to apply for all those grants. You wouldn't be able to be as successful as you are. However, your story and information needs to be told. And so what we can do now is alleviate some pressure off of you by creating videos of knowledge, of information for people. So therefore, if they can't get in contact with you because you're busy one week, they can look back on this information and they can extract what they need to extract from it to help them move forward.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
So like, this is not just a problem for the students coming behind us, but this is also to help solve a problem for the faculty, the staff, the people in the industry who are working their butts off to break through barriers, become successful, but they don't always have the time to stop. You know what I mean? There's not many of us, so we got to keep pushing. We got to keep working. But let's take a moment, make this little clip, and let's put it out there for people to extract and use for however they need to when they need to be successful.
Yeah.
Right.
That's visionary.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So this is the end of our episode. So I'd like to thank you, Dr. Brandon Pitts, for being on here. I'd ask the audience also to like, comment, subscribe, and ask us questions. Ask Brandon questions. All right. And I will make sure he gets them so he can answer them. But again, my takeaway is to stay curious, stay passionate, and ask questions. Those are the things that I learned in this podcast, and hopefully other people. And if you learned something different, put it in the comments and share out. All right. And if you also have something to add to anything that was said in this podcast, share it in the comments. We love to hear it. Until next time, thanks.